mai mo la le kala ala pono I ke kula o ku mano mano. Kuni ka no o mauna lahi lahi I ho maha kui ka vai o lua le. Leia nan uanu I ke kamakahala I pau ku ia me ka ahi. I ho o hino au na uno oe o ka ukulena pa ano ia. Hei ke hao le he lulu lima ke aloha e. E ia o ke kilohana ki kona nakamali e huli ana o ko hala I mauine e nana ana I kamakani he lau awa o wai pio o wai mano. He lua ko nā puʻua peli ai o puʻu wawa o puʻua na hulu o pili no me ka la hiki ola I ka mokunui la o Hawaiʻi. Ke kaune Hawaiʻi me he lupe ala ka lele oni ke poʻokaina nā pele akula ka mahale hua aku kele akula. Nui ka uala o I kua ka malama he ke haole he lulu lima ke aloha e. Aloha e, aloha e. Aloha everyone and welcome to beautiful Mission Memorial Auditorium at Honolulu Hale. My name is Makanani Salah and I'm the Director of Culture and the Arts Office for the Mayor of the City and County of Honolulu. We are so happy to be here today for this kickoff of the Hawaiʻi Triennial 2022. It's a long-awaited event and we're so proud to be one of the presenting sponsors for this. At this time, I'd like to introduce you all to Mayor of the City and County of Honolulu, Mr. Rick Blangiardi.
No, that's okay. Good morning, everybody. And we have some very distinguished guests. And I just have to tell you, I am absolutely thrilled. So I'm welcoming you not only as the mayor of the city and county of Honolulu, but let me be the voice of the thousands of people who are going to benefit from this experience coming up. So I want to thank you. This is great for our city and great for our state. You know, the last couple of years have been an incredible odyssey for all of us as people. And, you know, one of the things that about COVID we learned, especially in the mayoral position and the responsibilities we had, it was causing us to respond and recover simultaneously. And nobody had a playbook on how we were going to respond. But I can tell all of you, a few months ago, when we were really getting fed up with COVID, we made a determination. There were 3 events that had to happen this year, no matter what. And this was when we were still in Delta before Omicron even came. And we said this year for the city and county, we're going to run the Honolulu Marathon. And we're going to have the Sony Open. And to top off the trifecta, the best of all, we're going to make sure that HT22 happens. So I want to thank the curatorial team, because I know that they've put in an incredible amount of work, and others out here in this audience. I'll mention Makanani in a second. But I would be remiss if I didn't, and I just met them this morning, Dr. Melissa Chiu. Thank you. Dr. Miwako Tezuka, all the way from New York. Thank you. The weather's nice. Andrew Broderick, nice. I was pleased to see Midweek did a nice story on you folks as well. I thought it was really nice. I think you're going to get a great reception. I think our town right now is really ready to come out and embrace something like this. So I'm very excited. I'm also very grateful. So I know we have some really eloquent speakers up here to talk about it, but let me just say one last thing. Because earlier this month, we kicked off the month of February with a proclamation that said this was going to be Culture and Arts Month. Okay, and I have had the privilege, even though I've lived in Hawaii for most of my life, I've lived in some great cities in the world, grew up in Boston, and I don't think you can call yourself a great city unless you support the culture and the arts, and to do it in a really big way, not a small way. So that said, I can promise you now, we're 14 months, a little bit delayed in some ways with our administration, but we really plan to get behind in the support of the culture and the arts. And I give you that, that's my word to those of you that can call me on it, okay? Lastly, I want to thank Makanani and her team at our Office of Cultural Affairs, because they add credibility to what I just said. So once again, thank you. We're very excited. We're very grateful for all of your hard work, appreciation, and for all this represents for Hawaii and the people who live here. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Mayor Blangiardi and Makanani Salah, and to our partners of the City and County of Honolulu for advocating for the arts, creative expression, and helping us bridge contemporary art on a local and global scale. I'm Catherine Don, the Executive Director of Hawaii Contemporary. We are a dynamic young arts organization that champions contemporary art and ideas inspired by Hawaii and the Greater Pacific. Since our inception in 2014, Hawaii Contemporary has presented capsule exhibitions, education programs, and 2 internationally recognized art biennales periodic art exhibitions in partnership with renowned curators, exhibition spaces, and cultural venues across Hawaii. With a strong collaborative ethos, Hawaii Contemporary is a connector within our arts community. And for this third iteration, audiences will find us working with established arts and culture institutions such as Bishop Museum, the Hawaii State Art Museum, Honolulu Museum of Art, Iolani Palace, and also our alliances are present in non-traditional spaces and community spaces such as Foster Botanical Gardens, Hawaii Theater, and the Royal Hawaiian Center. So it's with great joy, and as the mayor said, it's incredible to have gotten to this moment through an unprecedented times of the pandemic that we celebrate the opening of the Hawaii Triennial. It's been a great change, a year of great change for all of us, and since our beginning, our organization changed its name to Hawaii Contemporary and shifted our signature event to a 3-year triennial format. So facing these challenges and across multiple time zones, we're just grateful to be here today with all of you to open this momentous event. Right now, I would like to take this moment to express our sincere gratitude to our lead presenting sponsors at the Hawaii State Art Museum, supported by the State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, and Make Visible, a nonprofit whose mission is to create and sponsor innovative platforms for artists. Please welcome Jonathan Johnson, Executive Director of the State Foundation of Culture and the Arts, and Karen Ewald, the Director of the Hawaii State Art Museum.
Good morning, Mayor, and aloha, everybody. On behalf of the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, we'd like to congratulate Hawaii Contemporary on launching of this Hawaii Triennial 2022, the Pacific Century. So, my name's Jonathan Johnson, Executive Director of State Foundation, and this is
Karen Ewald, Director of the Hawaii State Art Museum.
So, State Foundation shares a belief with the Hawaii Triennial that arts and culture are critical to the educational, economic, and social well-being of our individuals, our communities, and our state.
And as for the Hawaii State Art Museum, we are committed to providing a space where the people of Hawaii, visitors, and the arts community can gather, share ideas, and express their creativity. The museum is always free to the public and visitors alike, and after all, it's the People's Museum of Honolulu. The Hawaii State Art Museum is honored to be a featured presenting partner and exhibition venue for the Hawaii Triennial in support of arts research, education, planning, and exhibition presentations led by Hawaii Contemporary and its curatorial team. It's been a joy to work with them and to see our space come alive with the visions of the curators and the artists.
So we want to make sure we invite everyone to HiSam. Come out, especially on our evenings. We're open on first and second Fridays of every night of every month, and follow us on social media, and that's where you'll hear about all of it. And remember, it's always free at HiSam. So thank you and congratulations.
Oh, I can take this off. Aloha, everybody. My name is Taiji Terasaki, and my wife and I are the founders of Make Visible. This is a new name for us actually this year, but anyway, what I'm so proud of, it's been a long journey for Hawaii Contemporary, and this is, as you all know, this is our third iteration, but I know that the nonprofits have many challenges and need so much support from the community and donors and everything. I'm so grateful to HiSam this year who's stepped up to this, and I could just see, it's just amazing how it's grown from its beginnings, and how the community is really reaching out. We're so lucky to have the curators that we have this year, which makes a huge difference. And we're so lucky that locally we're well represented, but then we have Melissa Chiu and Miwako, and so all I could say is that my wife and I are really proud of how the organization has come to be, and I myself am an artist, and so I mean, even, it's just non-profits, but artists too need such support. And I really believe in Hawaii, and it needs to make its voice heard internationally. And the last thing I say that what's really very heartwarming to me is that we'll be bringing all this international artists here, and for the many people don't get exposed to contemporary art. I mean they're limited to stay on the island, so I'm so proud that we can offer that opportunity to expose, especially the young people and people that might choose to become artists. It really makes a difference what they are exposed to. So again, thank you very much. And my wife is not here right now, but she also really joins me and to say that we're very proud to be sponsors again this year. So thank you.
Thank you, Taiji. You and Naoko have been there since the beginning, and we're just so grateful for your enduring support and commitment. And your support for education. And this time we are just delighted that we're able to introduce this student all-access pass to access the Triennial for free, providing unlimited admission for students. Now I'd like to introduce our curators who will have a conversation introducing the Triennial. This third iteration, Hawaii Triennial 2022, Pacific Century e Ho'omau na Moananuiākea, is led by Dr. Melissa Chiu, a globally recognized curator and specialist of Asian contemporary art and the current director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. She's joined by Dr. Miwako Tezuka, a specialist of post-war Japanese contemporary art, and Drew Broderick, an emerging curator from Hawaii focusing on contemporary Kanaka art. The artwork presented carefully considers place and considers issues of environmental concerns, inequity and social justice, and legacies of colonialism in the 21st century. I truly do believe that art is the start of a conversation and that the world needs art more than ever, especially as contemporary art is a connector in sharing the voices that need to be heard. The artwork that the curators have introduced to the Triennial in Hawaii is truly a gift. And thank you both, all of you, Melissa, Miwako, and Drew, for sharing this with us. So now I'd just like to start with a few questions for the conversation. So first, can you share your vision about what is Pacific Century e Ho'omau na Moananuiākea?
Thank you, Kat. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's a great delight to be with you to share some of our ideas behind curating the exhibition. In some ways, the starting point of the exhibition was this place. We know that triennials are usually examples of exhibitions that bring international art to cities around the world. But we felt very strongly that this was a moment at which we could acknowledge this place, Hawaii and Honolulu, in the context of the Pacific, the Asia-Pacific, and the world. And I'm enormously appreciative of our collaborative spirit in Miwako and Drew for being able to take the idea of Pacific Century, Eho, o mau no Moananuiākea, to think about how art can play a part of people's lives. And so when we began to think about the theme, we realized that it was nearly a decade ago that Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was here in Honolulu and declared the 21st century as the Pacific Century. So now we're nearly a decade on, and in some ways our proposal is that the Pacific Century is really all about how we can think about the world through the lens of being here in Hawaii. How can we think about the contribution of artists who live and work here in a greater context? And so it was really in partnership with Miwako, with her expertise in Japanese modern and contemporary art and Asian contemporary art. And Drew, and I know many of you know him and his expertise, but as an artist and curator in this role. And his special knowledge of being here, living here, and making art, and writing about it. And so I think as we consider this moment, and it was I kind of think of this triennial as a little bit of a miracle that it happened. It's a miracle because it happened in spite of a global pandemic. We were able to work virtually and collaboratively to select works that in some ways reflect and respond to issues of place. So on the one hand, you have the larger kind of meta issue of what does the Pacific Century mean, when the 20th century was always described as the American century. The 21st century is perhaps the Pacific century at which we can think about new possibilities for culture. We were very deliberate about the places, not just the selection of art, but also the places that we worked collaboratively with museums in this city, but also other places that people may not expect to see art, and that was a really important part. So I wonder if I could turn, I know Kat has some other questions, but I would love to hear from Miwako and Drew on their own interpretations of this idea of Pacific Century, because it really is an idea that was intended to open up a conversation. It was not prescriptive. It was about opening up a conversation of what could this new century be if we think about Hawaii as in between the US and the Asia-Pacific region, and all of the possibilities that that has. So I might turn to Miwako and then Drew for her own comments.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, I really would like to thank everybody who collaborated with us, supported us, and make this miraculous project happen. So happy to be engaged with this dynamic vision of Pacific Century. Melissa, thank you for engaging us, and Drew for teaching us all. To me, Pacific Century, I visualize all the phrases. So Pacific Century to me has this connotation of movement. So I wanted to really be conscious about selecting artists who would engage with that movement of people, movement from one place to another, a movement of objects, which also relates to economy, global commercialism, and tourism, etc., that Hawaii actually plays a key role in throughout the history. So that was my understanding and interpretation of Pacific Century.
Mahalo for being here, everyone. It's great to gather in the ways that we can, especially now. And I'm also grateful to all of those who are not in the room, but who have played a really important role in making this triennial a reality. So the named and the unnamed. To add a bit to what Miwako and Melissa shared, maybe I'll comment on continuity, on perseverance, on carrying on, the notion of omau, to persevere. When we think about an internationally oriented contemporary art event, we don't often consider the local artists, least of all the indigenous artists, or the many organizations, grassroots and institutionalized that support them. So for me, and my role as a part of this collaborative curatorial process, it's really about carrying on for the people of Hawaii, for the artists of Hawaii, for the place that sustains the work that we do. So in that sense, I think the title is both reflective, as Melissa and Miwako mentioned, of larger processes that have been and continue to unfold across the Pacific as elsewhere. And it also really focuses on what's happening here. What artists are doing here, who they're doing it for, how they're doing it, and many of them since the mid-1970s. So when we think about kind of a larger history, we often overlook art histories of Hawaii, the stories of this place. But many of the participants in the Triennial are deeply committed to those stories, and they have been their entire lives. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. What would art be without showing some of the art? And so I'd like to maybe share some of the images of the artists' works that will be featured in the Triennial, and to pose a question following on your vision for the Pacific Century about how do the stories of place reflect in your curatorial vision? We might begin with the images of, at our Iolani Palace is one of our partners, and it's the first time that we are collaborating with them for the Triennial. And this is truly an honor to be able to work with such an honored institution here in Hawaii, but also to share collaboratively contemporary art with a place that has such a layered and complex history. So I'd like to ask the curators to share what this place has, how it's factored into the Triennial vision and planning.
So we selected 3 artists to show their work at the Iolani Palace. This is an image of the work that Jennifer Steinkamp created, especially for the Triennial and especially for the Palace. This is Richard Bell, and this is an image of his Aboriginal tent embassy, which will become a public forum for discussion of topical issues relevant here to Hawaii. And the image that you see there was actually of an image taken from Sydney, which is was one of the sites where this tent has been shown. It is on the move all around the world. The next image.
Sorry, I think that one image missing here is actually a poem by the artist Jamaica Osorio.
Yeah, just to comment on that quickly, Heoli's poem speaks to ea, to independence and sovereignty, through her personal relationship to her family and to the work that they've done and continue to do. And I think it makes a really significant connection between the personal and the political, and how the personal is always political.
I'd like to actually just follow on with Drew. In recent years, there's been an upswing in highlighting strong wahine leaders, and Queen Liliuokalani is the source of inspiration for a number of these artists. How do you think these art installations and contributions can further the conversation about wahine empowerment?
Happy to speak to that question. I grew up in a matriarchy, as many of us do here. So it's not something that I necessarily consider in the way that you've framed the question, Kat, because I think it's very embedded in the way that many of us live and work and care in Hawaii. We honor women. And so many of the installations across the Triennial center on Native Hawaiian women and women artists and the important roles that they have played and continue to play in moving the conversation forward here in Hawaii and elsewhere. Hawaii Contemporary is full of strong, powerful women leaders, and it's been a privilege to work, as a young man in that setting, and to learn from the knowledge that all of you folks share so willingly, and the work that you do. Yeah.
And I didn't have a chance to say that Jennifer Steinkamp's video projection, her artwork, is a tribute to Queen Liliuokalani, and in particular the flowers that were given to her in tribute while she was imprisoned in the palace. So it was an important work that the Triennial commissioned, especially for the opening, and I think it is very deliberate that the opening of the Triennial begins at Iolani Palace as a way of grounding the exhibition in Hawaiian history.
And we have 7 exhibition sites and over 43 artists and collectives. So we'd like to introduce maybe one of our other exhibition sites at Bishop Museum, and also to pose the question about how does the curatorial team collaboratively approach the selection of artists and how to invite some of the artists for their participation.
So perhaps we can move to one of the actual images, yes. So I think sometimes it's useful to talk about the selection of art and artists with specificity, because each artist brings something to the exhibition. And the selection that we made was with the idea that each brings their own point of view, certainly, but also contributes something to the theme. And so I might turn to Miwako to talk briefly about Gaku's work, because it does relate to this place in Hawaii and its military.
Thank you, Melissa. So Gaku Tsutaya is a Japanese artist now based in New York, and she's known for animation and sculptural installations and drawings. And oftentimes she focuses on bringing out the kind of dark historical narratives and creates her own imaginative stories to bring out the histories that have never been thought through or considered in depth. So this time at Bishop Museum, one of 7 venues that we have in Castle Building, we bring and present her an installation. It is called Enola's Head, and it's a life-size replica of Enola Gay. And in it is a video projection that speculatively tells the story of the nuclear industry, which affects not only Japanese people who were, historically speaking, the only victims of the use of nuclear weapon, but also how it is still affecting a lot of communities here throughout the Pacific and also U.S. mainland. So in this way, rather than illustrating the history, she is creating a platform for everybody to consider the histories that is still ongoing around us.
These are some images of New Aitu, New Avatar, that the Pacific Sisters, widespread collective of indigenous women and their allies, have produced for the Triennial. They speak to the kind of fundamental question of who are you? So the images are representations of the sisters answering that question for themselves. And they'll be on view at Castle Building, at Bernice Pauahi Bishop Museum, right when you enter as a sort of greeting for visitors. You arrive into a circle of the Pacific Sisters avatars. I might just add quickly, this goes back to Kat's question before about the importance for all of us to center on place. And as a part of the Triennial, the organization has commissioned a number of texts by Dr. Noelani Arista and a former student, Sarah Koiva, that delve into the stories of place. So each venue has an accompanying text that helps to ground visitors in the place that they are before they, or as they are experiencing the artworks.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. It's been an incredible journey and honor to work with you to realize the publication that accompanies the Triennial. It's really a scholarly catalog that has a number of texts newly commissioned, but also reprinted to provide a greater a context for the issues and themes that are presented in Pacific Century. I believe there's one more work from Bishop Museum which provides just another way of experiencing art. And I don't know if you mentioned that Pacific Sisters' work is actually a work of augmented reality. It's not just image, and the non-traditional art forms in the Triennial is truly exciting. So.
This is a work by Michael Drew and Alchemy Verse. And in thinking about Bishop Museum as a science natural history museum, we thought of Michael and his ability to create works that bridge that, sometimes chasm between science and art. He, in fact, was trained as a scientist, and so comes from that background. He created a number of works that he describes as being sonified. So he collected coral from a nearby beach, Sands Island, in fact. So it has that in and of itself has its own history as a previous internment camp. And he created this necklace that was inspired by a necklace belonging to Queen Niliakalani in the Bishop Museum collection. And so you see here the image of the whole process of sonifying the necklace, meaning you'll be able to hear the necklace as well as see it.
The necklace is a part of a much larger installation, and as Melissa said, really holds space for not just a visual experience, but for listening, for sound that is resonating through your bones in order to be heard. There's a large fossil work, which is also a reference to sort of geological time, different scales of understanding, different scales of storytelling. And running throughout the installation is a recording of the Kumulipo that's being recited both in English and Hawaiian. And it's been distorted in a way where it's still legible, but it really becomes more of an environment, an atmosphere that Michael's work sits within, and that visitors are able to experience through his work.
Well, speaking of experiences, we have another venue in partnership with the City and County of Honolulu. We are grateful to be exhibiting at the Foster Botanical Gardens again for the third time. And maybe I'd like to pose this question for Miwako to introduce our collaborative fashion duo, Toka, in which she is also representing today.
She's wearing toka.
I'm wearing toka. This is the drop of their collection called Midnight Smoothie, which is developed specifically for this occasion of the Triennial. About their work, I think Drew can talk about more in detail while kind of look at what I'm wearing.
So Toka's aesthetic, they refer to as extreme sport resort. In a kind of earnest but also ironic sense. And for the Triennial, they've produced a new lion, which Miwako is wearing a piece from, and it sits within the Orchid Conservatory at Foster, surrounded by large floral arrangements that they made in collaboration with Renko, and that's produced of material sourced from the grounds of the garden. I think they bring a youthful energy into the mix, and are working between Manila and Honolulu, which is a sort of important connection looking in the other direction instead of towards North America. And I think they bring, a youthful exuberance to the Triennial to supplement and bolster some of the projects by artists from older generations.
And I may add, this design is perfect for this weather. Has a very practical, benefit to it. So please, please check out their website. I think they're going to drop the line online soon.
They'll have a gift shop in collaboration with the Friends of the Honolulu Botanical Garden at Foster as well.
And the image that you're looking at is actually a movie poster. So the release of their collection is through a film that they filmed here in Hawaii, and truly a collaborative endeavor with many creatives here in Hawaii and abroad, including narration by Morgan Freeman. But speaking of collaboration, I think one of the other works in the gardens was the result of many, many volunteers to work with the artist Leroy New.
So Leroy New is a Manila-based artist, designer, and he has created this amazing outdoor sculpture utilizing bamboo sourced from the island, as well as surfboards that are used up and cannot be ridden anymore, and along with plastic bottles, water bottles. And he has created this shape that looks almost like a giant clam, which has these tentacles reaching out to the trellis that is already on the ground of Foster Botanical Garden's economic garden part. So this really was as Kat mentioned, collaborative effort. We all participated in harvesting bamboo, stripping it down, making it into things that Leroy himself can weave into this sculpture. So this addresses the issue of environmental issue, as well as how we may create new meaning to the materials that we bring to the world, and make something that engages people's imagination, so we can think something creative using materials all around us.
This is work by Ai Weiwei, and we were fortunate to have Ai Weiwei as one of the speakers for the Hawaii Contemporary Summit that preceded the exhibition, the Triennial. And what you're seeing is a selection of 3 trees. 2 of them are wooden, and they're created by grafting together different trees. It's really, in some respects, tree roots that are kind of transposed. And the 3rd tree is made from iron. And what Ai Weiwei often plays with in his visual art, because we know him also to be a political activist and also create documentary films now, is that he's interested in the history of materials and even more recently the environment. He went to the Amazon and became very interested in particular in some of the large trees that were being destroyed and the Amazon environment that was being degraded for agriculture. And so that I think spurred him on to not just create these trees that are vestiges of other trees, so it's almost a conglomerate with the wooden trees. And then the iron tree is that singular kind of put together tree that in some ways iron is that most resilient of materials, but it does evolve and change as it's exposed to air. So we'll see it change color as the exhibition progresses. But I think Ai Weiwei is very committed to social issues, to indigenous issues, and he really wanted to have his presence here as a response to the natural environment.
In our collaboration with the Honolulu Museum of Art, I'd like to ask how this collaboration has evolved and how you've thought about introducing a variety of different artists, both from Hawaii and from abroad, to the Honolulu Museum of Art, and how you've selected the placement of and engagement with artists in the museum.
Before speaking about Ed Greavy and Moananuiākea Trask's collaborative work, maybe it makes sense to just acknowledge the way in which, as a curatorial team, we really wanted to bring different art histories into the galleries at the Honolulu Museum of Art, hopefully to have different kinds of conversations that many of us in Hawaii have grown up surrounded by, but may not necessarily be on the walls in the museums that we frequent. So here we're looking at an image by Ed Greavy. This is from the speech on the beach in 1993, in which U.S. President Bill Clinton began a process that ended in the apology bill. At HOMA, we have a series of works by Ed, accompanied by captions written by Moananuiākea Trask, and the captions and image together help to document a story of land struggles here in Hawaii, a story of land struggles that has taken place for many, many years, but for Ed and Haunani from around 1971 until the early 00s. So their creative alliance and long-term collaboration, I think for us was important in the sense that it acknowledges a kind of dynamic that can exist between native and non-native communities, both working together to advance social justice issues in the places that they're from and that they've chosen to move to. A great work to start off the conversation about the Honolulu Museum of Art.
You're seeing here an image by Theasta Gates. It is a video that sits along with some of his sculptures. Most know Theasta's works that are grounded in his community in Chicago, and particularly reflective of his African American Black experience. What is lesser known is his connection, deep connection, and collaboration with Japanese ceramics. He spent a lot of time in Japan from the very beginning, and his work with clay has a lot of similarities and connections to the Japanese ceramics tradition. And he is placed in the Japanese gallery. And his work, his clay works in particular, that are with tar, which is a material that he uses a lot that refers back to his experiences and connections to his father, reflect a real dialogue, a conversation between his work and a number of the Japanese works in the HOMA collection. And I can't go without referring to Miwako, whose expertise in this area, if she'd like to say something.
Sure. I think working with HOMA team and considering their collection pieces has really enriched the curatorial approach, and who we may place in an institutional setting. And Tiasta is one really great example where he brought his own practice and background in pottery making to speak to the collections of wonderful ceramic pieces in Homa collection. So installation is purposefully in visual engagement with his vases and Homa collection, and franked with beautiful gilt gold background Japanese screen. So it is a new way of seeing their collection. I think that is something we wanted to do to bring an expansive approach to the museum.
I know in the Honolulu Museum of Art, there are 4 different galleries that are used for the Triennial. In introducing Xu Bing as a prominent Chinese contemporary artist, can you also speak to how his work might represent the idea of landscape that is present in this particular gallery installation?
So, Xu Bing, what you're seeing here are actually 2 images, which is the front and the reverse. And so the front of the image on your left is what you first encounter when you walk into the gallery. And what it looks like, or what it refers to, is a scroll painting, usually rendered in ink. And it holds historical references to one of the 3 perfect things, as it was referred to in China, as one of the main art forms, that if one thought of oneself as an artist, you had to understand and practice. You had to be good at ink painting. And so Xu Bing is really playing with that by, in some ways, creating what looks at first glance to be a substantial scroll ink painting. And yet when you walk around to the back of this work, it's not that at all. In fact, the image is created from plastic bags, bits of string, straw, all of these materials that would otherwise be considered detritus. And so he often refers to calligraphy and the cultural traditions of China, where he's from, and he plays with them. There's always a sense of play and trying to provide kind of an accessibility to these traditions that are usually somewhat impenetrable for those who didn't come from those places. And so here I think he's done a really good job of creating both a sense of wonder but also a sense of play with the cultural tradition of China.
Thank you. I know we have 3 more venues that we wanted to introduce, and we have some images here of the artists who are on view at the Hawaii State Art Museum. Could you speak just holistically about how this vision for HiSam was conceived and what visitors can expect to experience there?
Yeah, sure. Let me just start by saying mahalo to JJ and Karen, who are with us right now, for supporting in the ways that you folks have. The installation at the Hawaii State Art Museum really centers on the transformative potential of collaboration. Collaboration between different cultures across different times, but always in service of people and place. So the artists at HiSam include Namako āina, which is an independent documentary filmmaking team comprised of Joan Lander and Puhi Pao that have documented many, many issues here in Hawaii and the Greater Pacific for decades. Another artist duo is Elapaio Press, his brothers Richard and Mark Hamasaki. And through printed matter and time-based media, they've also participated for decades in kind of social justice and art, intersecting social justice and arts worlds here in Hawaii. This is images of Piliamo'o, which is a collaborative duo, Mark Hamasaki again, and Kapiolani Landgraf. And together they have documented the construction of Interstate H3 and accompanying devastation of cultural sites of significance across Ko'olaupoko. Mark and Kapu at HiSam will be presenting a large body of work that was produced between 1989 and around 1994. And it really focuses on the ways in which public works projects aren't always for the public that they claim to be serving. And the artists really try to focus on telling the story of the valleys that were ruined in the process of construction. This is images of Naleo Kanaloa, a book by Aipohaku Press put out in 1995 that really tells the story of Kanaloa, of the Protect Ho'olawe Ohana's efforts to reclaim, revitalize, and remember the island of Kaho'olawe. So Aipohaku Press is Miley Meyer and Barbara Pope, and they're presenting a reading room and a selection of related publications. And I believe this is the last collective at HiSam. This is Tropic Editions, led by Marika Emi. And Tropic Editions, unlike the collaboratives that I just spoke about, is a much younger generation. They're guided by and invested in queer expressivity and really exploring what identity means today to youth in Hawaii and how they can participate in those conversations to bring a bit of queerness to the world.
Thank you. Amy, you've introduced a lot of unusual experiences for viewers at the different exhibition sites, and one of our partners is the Hawaii Theater Center. Could you just briefly talk about what it's meant to collaborate with a non-traditional contemporary art space to introduce this presentation?
I think the uniqueness of using non-traditional spaces is the surprise element and what that surprise can provide as a window into a new world and new perspective into the world. So at Hawaii Theater Gallery, we invited Min Wong, a Singaporean artist who is known for his performances. And in this triennial, we're presenting his video collage work as immersive experience at the gallery, theater gallery. So in focusing on the Bloody Mary, the iconic figure from the musical and movie South Pacific. So in this work, he is addressing the issue of performativity of identity and how it changes from time to time. We all perform our identity, so you know, the theater, it was the perfect place to bring in that question of our own identity. And I think throughout the triennial selection of artists, many artists are considering their identities and their place in history and place. So this is, you know, kind of a holistic curatorial framework that we aspire to present.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting to think about unexpected encounters and the difference of place. We're honored to partner with Royal Hawaiian Center to exhibit in one of the former commercial spaces there. Could you share, in general, what is a takeaway that you feel will resonate beyond Hawaii with an international audience, especially by selecting this exhibition spot in Waikiki?
So I was interested in this site because having, studied and been immersed in the developments of contemporary art in Asia, in the absence of museums and a gallery system or network, artists often found ways of showing their work in non-conventional spaces. And so shopping centers actually have a long tradition within the Asia-Pacific region for being places for unexpected art exhibitions. And so when we were presented with the opportunity of showing at the Royal Hawaiian Center, I felt that then, speaking to Drew's idea of continuity, actually this was a link up to that whole history, in a way, of the past 40 years in Asia of artists making do with what they had. And so here at the Royal Hawaiian Center, we have a number of artists contributing projects. This is one of them, the AA projects. It is a free store that they first did in the last financial crisis in Wall Street. And when we were planning for the exhibition, I felt like that we were heading into another kind of financial crisis. Little did I know it was actually a global pandemic. But we felt like this free store, which is essentially a store where there is no financial transaction, people can take the objects or leave objects. And it speaks to this idea of an exchange. It also, I think, is something that's very different for a retail space. And so we wanted to call attention to that idea of exchange as opposed to transaction. This is a work by Momoyo Toramitsu, and she's in another one of the gallery spaces that we've created at Royal Hawaiian Center, and Miwako will speak to her work.
Yes, speaking of surprise, I think each venue has this moment when you open the doors, you're surprised. There's always something that really grabs your attention immediately. So I won't describe how you will encounter this work at Royal Hawaiian Center. I would really encourage people to go there and open the doors. And our hope is that everybody not thinking about contemporary art as something too difficult to understand or too foreign to you. We wanted to create purposeful windows for everybody to open so that they can, really free their mind. So Momoyo's work, one of which is this pink bunny, is going to really surprise you and hopefully activates your imagination.
This is a digital rendering from a printed takeaway by Lawrence Seward, and it speaks to some of the issues that define epicenters of tourism, like Waikiki, but like many places throughout the Pacific. It also has elements of surprise, as Miwako was just talking about, kind of surprise encounter, but in Lawrence's case, maybe with a lead story that you wouldn't want to find yourself in, instead of one that you would gravitate to with joy. I'll stop there, but encourage you to pick up a copy of The Seaward Sun. It's a printed tabloid, and it can be found at Royal Hawaiian Center and at a number of the other Triennial venues.
Well, speaking of joy, I hope that everyone encounters these works with the same sentiment, and there's so much more to see, so thank you so much for sharing, and just a sneak preview of a lot of the artists in the Triennial. I believe we have some one-on-one conversations. Well, I just thought we might end with just a final question to the curators of what lessons, insights, or hopes do you hope that the HT22 will impart on the audience here in Hawaii and from abroad? Maybe in a single word. Just
I think that coming out of a 2-year COVID moment, we would like this to offer experiences with art that people haven't been able to have for these past 2 years. So that would be the starting point. In another way, the exhibition offers experiences that are, yes, an encounter with art, but what contemporary art can often do is to challenge us, to highlight histories, and to think about the world that we live in different ways. And each artist brings to the project that different perspective and different medium. And so that would be one aspiration, I think, that I have for the exhibition. But I'd like to hear from Miwako and Drew as well.
My aspirations. I think the takeaway from this experience of curating Triennial during this time is that arts and culture are a crucial part of human life. We all experience and suffer through lockdowns, quarantines, isolation, and I cannot thank enough all the artists who worked with us throughout such difficulties. And I was given encouragement by them, and I learned from their resilience and perseverance despite the difficulties. And I think we can all kind of sympathize and understand that need of being inspired by new visions and open mind. And I think if this triennial can speak to people here and across the world, I think that would be, my, I guess, hope. Thank you.
And maybe I'll just add a comment about belief. I think the curatorial team and the organization, as Miwako said, really believes in the importance of artists, of museums, of public spaces that support expressions of culture. That's why we're doing what we're doing, because we believe in the power of art. So maybe one hope for a visitor is that they walk away with a little more belief in what the arts can do for them, for their community, for the cities that they live in. And, I think if 20,000 people walk away with a little more belief, maybe next iteration there'll be a little more support, and we can build from there. In the way that the Triennial is building on the biennials that took place in 2019 and 2017, and is receiving support in ways that it didn't in its early years. Belief in the arts.
Thank you. Thank you for believing in the organization, and thank you for sharing and articulating and visualizing this hope and belief for all of us. Thank you to our partners, to the city and county for hosting us today, and for our sponsors. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to welcoming you to the Triennial.